Press all set? Guys all set? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's do this. Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to the September meeting of the Fairfield Board of Finance. I want to welcome our new member, Sheila Marmion. Welcome back from the Board of Selectmen to the Board of Finance. I think you've moved up in the world.
I like to think so.
From our estimation. And with you being our newest member, I'd ask you to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd ask everyone to remain standing for a second. The town suffered a loss last week with the death of our former assessor, Tom Brown. Now, a lot of us have been on this job or on this board for many years. And frequently we're asked, why do you do it? You don't get paid. What do you get for being part of this board? And one of the things you get is to really interact with some great town managers and some great people and learn a great deal of things. And one of the best people to interact with was Tom Brown. He was filled with life. He was so much fun to be around. He was warm, he was welcoming, he was engaging. He was a font of information about assessors and his profession. He was well liked and beloved by all. And he was a very nice friend and a good companion and partner and husband to our dear friend Betsy Brown. So the town's going to miss him, but we benefit from his years of hard work and service to all of us. So to Betsy and to the Brown family, our extended condolences. And I'm just going to remember Tom with a smile every time I think of him moving forward. And I would ask that we hold a moment of silence in his honor. Thank you. All right, a few announcements. Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Hopkins send their regrets for this evening. One is ill and one actually had a business trip that he could not rearrange to attend. Also, First Selectman Tetro was kind enough to call me today and said that he has an unavoidable personal conflict this evening that he needed to attend to, so he could not be here. Looking at our agenda for this evening, I think that's probably quite all right. We can handle it without him. Also, some good news. Hopefully, people have followed it on social media, our friends. Mr. Stone, our former member, became a grandfather this past week. So congratulations to him. If he's watching, I can't imagine he would, but if he's watching, we extend our congratulations to he and his wife and his family and our best wishes on their new baby. And as I said earlier, Mrs. Marmion, welcome to the board. We look forward to working with you even more closely than we did in the past. All right, our agenda this evening. We have about 6 items. To hear, consider, and approve the minutes, 3 of our meetings in May and 1 of our meetings in June. To hear, consider, and act upon a resolution recommended by the Director of Public Works for a $20,000 grant. We have to hear, consider, and act upon a request from the Chief Fiscal Officer to approve schedules of encumbrance and reappropriations as of the end of the fiscal year. This is kind of normal course activity. Item number 4 is to hear, consider, and act upon a request from the Chief Fiscal Officer to approve transfers as of June 30th, 2016. Now, we do this in the past. We've done this in the past, relative to contract negotiations and really cleaning up the books for the year end and for our audit. This year's a little bit different in that we're also dealing with some issues relative to the state budget cuts and how that impacts our transfer. And I know the Chief Fiscal Officer will walk us through this, how we're using some of the funds from 2016 to help us in the 2017 budget. You will recall that budget was approved before we knew exactly what we were getting from the state of Connecticut this year. Item number 5 is to go over various committee reports. And item number 6 is to hear, consider, and act upon any communications. Does anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns before we go through the agenda? Seeing none, we'll start with item number 1. To hear, consider, and approve the minutes of the May 5th regular meeting, May 17th quarterly review meeting, May 26th special meeting, and the June 7th regular meeting. Does anybody have a desire to split these minutes up? Okay, anybody else? Okay, Ms. Leclerc, fine. We'll split the minutes up and vote on them separately. So I'm going to call for a vote. Can I move this? Mr. Brown, seconding Ms. Leclerc. We're going to move May 5th, 2016 regular meeting minutes are now before us. Questions, comments, concerns? All in favor of those minutes? Those opposed, abstentions, Mrs. Marmion abstains. Now we'll deal with the May 17th quarterly review meeting. Questions, comments on these? Seeing none, all in favor of these minutes? Opposed, abstentions, Mrs. Marmion abstains. And then we'll do May 26, 2016 special meeting. Questions, concerns? Anybody? Seeing none, all in favor of these minutes? Opposed, abstentions, Mrs. Marmion. And we'll do the June 7, 2016 regular meeting minutes. Questions, comments? None, all in favor? Opposed, abstained, Mrs. Marmion. That's it. Oh, who else? I'm sorry, I missed you too. My apologies. Mr. Mottola and Mrs. Leclerc, thank you.
So in that case, it doesn't pass?
1, 2,
2 yea,
3.
3.
We abstain, so it adjusts down, so it passes. Okay. Item number 2. To hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution is recommended by the Director of Public Works. Resolved that Michael C. Tetro, First Selectman of the Town of Fairfield, is hereby authorized to expend up to $20,000 to purchase and install 4 single-head electric vehicle charging stations at 755 Melville Avenue and 785 Uncor Road. Said funds to be 100% reimbursed from grants made available by the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection under Connecticut's Public Fleet Electric Vehicle and Public Workplace EV Charging Station Incentive Program. Who is here to speak to this issue? Mr. Demonchik, come on up. Welcome.
Thank you.
And if you'd like to step us through this, I would greatly appreciate it.
President, over the years, the state has made available funds for electric charging in the last 2 years.
Mr. Bell.
We received funds for, I think one is the library, one is James Beach, now we're getting funds for these 2. The Energy Task Force, the chairman couldn't be here. Basically said, a lot of interest from the teachers in this. And I got a call from people in the school that are very anxious to get it going. There are teachers, a lot of electric cars, a lot ready to use. So, trying to get it done as soon as possible so we can get it installed before Christmas. Like 30-day lead time. We've already run out the bid on it, so we know that it's something like $19,500, so it's tough money for this. The RTM doesn't meet in September, so once they meet, then we will contract.
Thank you. Do we have questions on this item from board members? We'll go to Mr. Brown.
So where are you going to put them?
Went to Warden Law.
Okay, you can put them at the school. Okay. And Mrs. Leclerc asked this question more than a few times. When do we receive the money? We purchase first?
Yes, reimbursement.
Okay, thank you.
Ed, how are these going to be used?
Everything will be used by the teachers
To do what?
for the electric vehicles.
That they have at the school?
Yes, that they either have or intend to buy. We say to them that they're either have or intend to buy. And these can be staged, so any one day, 4 vehicles.
So these are teachers with their personal vehicles are going to use these charging stations. What's the benefit to the town?
Then for the town, it's just the idea of pursuing green solutions to power reducing air pollution. When you put them on school property, no one can use them except school personnel. But they wanted them, and it doesn't cost them time, so we're pursuing it. We also have a river to the school system.
Who will pay, will we have an electric bill based on these after.
Electric bill, and the town can decide whether they want to charge it back to the customer.
Okay, so there is an actual expense to the town
Right,
of the electricity that is used after these are installed. And these are solely for the use of Board of Education employees at those two locations.
anyone else who's, allowed to be on school grounds and park their car, it's pretty restricted to school property.
Mr. Matola?
What about like on a weekend? Can I go over there and charge my car? I think they let you.
School property on a weekend, I don't know.
Yeah, I think they would.
If they do, you can, yeah.
Okay. Do we actually have the grant already? Because I was reading something in the material that said this had to be done by June 1st of 2016. Gotcha. Okay.
Mrs. Marmion first, and then we'll go to Mr. Wolf.
Thanks. It says that the applicant, in the application, it says the applicant commits to make the EV charging stations readily available to employees and the public at no fee for at least the next 3 years. What happens in 3 years? I thought we were going to, so the town will, so if we make the decision based on cost-benefit analysis of, use and expense, et cetera, that it's not beneficial to the town, would they get removed at our cost, at the supplier's cost?
Once they're there, it'll be there if you want to get rid of it, we own them.
But do we know what the expense is, for example, for getting rid of them?
Expenses, the only expenses are for the cost of electricity. But nothing compared to the town. I know, no one's ever thought of why we want to get rid of it. We have an extremely great, rail station, center, library.
And do we know that they're being used, or do we know?
There's a bill, it's like a meter, you want to let you know. Some are used more than others, the one that Chairman Green is using, one direction is a lot, the one at the railroad station, accessory park, another car uses it all. I don't know if there are any reasons for why one is using it. The real purpose of this is to try and encourage the electric vehicle. There'd probably be more scooters, be more electric cars than stations or electric vehicles. Once the stations are there, I think people will start buying vehicles, charging them. We try to find some on the private property on the east side of town, shopping center.
I think Whole Foods has one. Whole Foods in Fairfield has one.
Yes, Whole Foods does. We try to do it over at, what's the other one, I'm going to talk about Turnpike there.
Trader Joe's?
Trader Joe's. Not Trader Joe's, the owner of the property. Trader Joe's does have them close to a corner, they don't have it here. But the task force is going around the property. I don't know what it would restrict.
So just because these are going to be at the high schools, are they going to be limited during the week to teachers and not the students who park there?
No, anyone who comes to the school, anyone who has the access to the school parking lot, students, teachers, that's what we do.
So I'm just curious, do we know what an average charge is, or what the electric cost is?
We really don't have that much experience, because the charges can be for 1 hour, 2 hours, or 8 hours. And the cost is, if I recall, on Sherman Green for a year, it cost the town about $500. They're not very expensive. They don't take a lot of power. It's for slow charges over 3 or 4 hours. And the way it works, so you have to be there for 8 hours to charge. But if you leave, you have a charge at home, as people do. And they leave, they can plug it in for an hour, keep the charge up, and plug it in for an hour over here. So they're not really getting a lot of electricity or a lot of cost.
Thank you.
Mr. Walsh?
So have you done any type of analysis on what the average cost per one of these units is costing the town? Because we have now, how many of them do we have?
Well, right now, operating, we have one at the tennis center, one at the Fairfield Library, one at the rec center, and one at Sherman Green, and one at the road.
So we have 5?
3 of them are brand new,
for each one?
There's really isn't that much use, but, 3 or 4 years, there will be hopefully more use. There is no start charging now.
How will you charge back for the use? I understand that at the school, like, you could probably have to sign out or get a key or something like that and say, okay. Oh, there is, okay. Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Just kind of question that you guys are talking around but haven't actually. What would be the cost to the town if they were used to full capacity?
Mr. Becker?
Full capacity, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours.
Full capacity, I guess, would be 24 hours a day. I mean, to be full capacity, but, well, no, I mean, I guess the first question is, people have access to the school grounds any time of the day. There's no law that says people can't drive onto the school grounds, so people could come up during the day to use them. I don't know if that would cause any problems or not, if we have to have any ordinance or laws to address that. But certainly, but the question is, if they were used by teachers or principals or janitors or custodians or the public, and they were used from 8 a.m. to midnight or something, what would the cost be?
I have the same question. I mean, if there's condominium complexes across from Ward. I mean, well, what happens if I had a car there? Why would I charge to myself when I could park it right across the street and charge it overnight?
Before education told me that the parking lots are restricted to students and employees, and I don't know how much ever public to anything.
How?
General public.
During the day,
I mean, the rec centers are open 350 days.
but not after.
18 hours a day. But, remember, people aren't there for 8 hours.
Are there ways to put a timer on it so like during school hours it's operational and then after school hours it's not operational? That seems to be a fair compromise on the system.
Mr. Becker?
Yeah, so a couple things. Who's going to pay for it, the Board of Ed or the town? And they've agreed that they're fine if they get some bill for $5,000 for these teachers showing up and doing this, and they're going to pay for it? And the energy that's coming out of this, is this coming off of solar, or is this coming off of the grid, which primarily is the grid? Okay, so that's going to be fossil fuels and all that potentially anyways? Okay. So the decision to put them on the school grounds was, and I understand that, I mean, you mentioned the teachers discussing that they want it, but why not take, I guess, 2 of these and put them in another high visibility public type location? So yeah, no, I understand that side. I mean, and I appreciate all the work that you do with a lot of the energy and the probably millions of dollars ultimately that are saved in the town because of that and all the different grants. These have always been sort of something that has had a lot of questions surrounding them, and this one's even more difficult because I think we're talking about people coming to work, parking their car there all day. That 1 meter could go to 4 different vehicles. That we're talking about 8 either vehicles or potential vehicles. They're going to show up, they're going to park in the same spot, they're going to plug in, and if they're from 30 or 40 miles away, which a fair amount of teachers are, they're going to have a fair amount of use sitting there all day, and it's going to start racking up a bill, and it's going to go against an education budget that's, I guess versus the town, but the education budget and all those strains. And if the goal with a lot of this is sort of to keep pushing people to buy electric cars, which I used to be more supportive of now, but the reality is you're tucking them away on a potentially private lot where they might see them but not even be able to use them. If they even see them, I don't even know where they're going to be. So it sort of defeats that sort of purpose. I'd rather just put 2 of them at one end and the other of Jennings or something to that effect that, or the different lots in Penfield. I mean, where you could say, okay, well, if you're over here, you're over there, and you get that public, I mean, that's the push, it seems like this, is almost use them a little, hey, we want you to buy electric cars, not come here and plug in every single day and use our electricity, which is the taxpayers and the kids from the Board of Ed, then you're home. So, I mean, at least, I appreciate you answering the questions. I understand it's not you that necessarily picked it. On my end, I'm not going to support it, but. Yeah, and in the past, even with some of the doubts and not being thrilled that I voted on it, largely because the use is somewhat limited, we know the locations, and I get that. The school one is starting to worry me a little because we're talking about high school. There's a lot of teachers. You're right. There's going to be a bunch of people with electric cars. They're going to plug in every single day for 180 plus days out of the year, and that's concerning.
Thank you, Mr. Becker.
Thank
Would Mrs. Leclerc? Yeah.
How big are these units? Will we lose any parking spaces if we put these in? What? Okay, and so only one car at a time can plug in? Two cars can park in. But you don't lose a parking space by putting this equipment in?
Well, while they're charging, but they'd be parked somewhere anyway.
Well, the only difference is you're supposed to move them, I guess, right? If you're charged?
Right.
And then have a free spot so somebody else can pull in?
Frankly, what I can tell, the teachers are working with them to figure out how we can, once we use 2 hours, once we use 4 hours, so they won't hire for the whole day, assuming they all get electric cars. So they're trying to work out a plan themselves, how they're going to
It sounds like a teacher plan, not a student plan, though. And that's a concern of mine. I mean, the students should have equal play to this, and shouldn't be a teacher directed, we have a plan, that you're not part of this whole thing.
No, students have cars in the high schools. Right. So, and their space won't be one of those spaces.
And if they're paying, they should at least get some electricity out of it.
What's the, has the Board of Education voted on this?
I'm filling in.
Yeah, you're pinch hitting. So, but the economics of this is, it's $19,500 for 4 units. 4 units for 3 years. What's the useful life of these units?
Useful life of the units is 10, 12 years.
Okay. All right.
I'm engaged on for a service contract on all of them.
Who's paying for that?
So we are, it's about $1,700 a year.
Well, all these not a big deals kind of add up. All of a sudden, not a big deal becomes a big deal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do we have service contracts on the other ones as well?
This will be on all, $1,700 for all the ones.
On all the ones in town?
So,
We have one that broke down, the UI gave us, no one knows how to fix it. So we got a contractor who installed them for us. You only had to pay me $1,000. I should use that word.
so we have $400 per unit? Is that per unit per month?
The service contract is $1,700
No, I'm sorry, forget that.
for the whole town.
No, for each unit, you said it's $400 per year?
That's been our experience.
$400 per year, so it's $1,200 a year for 3 units? For 3 years, we have to eat that cost.
That's with limited use.
Limited use, right. We don't know what this could be.
It's going to build up over time.
Right.
Well, it seems as though if they have a system where they're going to be using it 2 hours, that they're going to have a plan on how to do it, that it's going to be pretty much used for the 8 hours. Yeah, so it's probably going to be more than $400.
Yeah, I would think.
I mean, this is not like where somebody pulls into town, one of the town spots and occasionally uses it. This sounds like people are going to be planned usage.
Mr. Mayor, you had something you wanted to say in the midst of that?
It'd be nice to know what the numbers are. I have no idea.
It'd be nice to know what the numbers are. We're also, if we do this, we're actually saying the Board of Education, you're going to pay for this electric cost. It's going to come out of your budget, regardless of whether it's, to your point, a small amount of money or a big amount of money. right? It's coming out of their budget.
My assumption is they know it, and I hate to assume, but they did it for Riverfield School last year, not part of our.
What are the rates there? How much are we paying there?
I have no idea what anything. They did that.
Maybe we should get this information put on.
Yeah.
The other stations, how'd we buy them? Are they through grants as well?
Some of them were fancy, some of them were at the recreation center and at the new rec facility down at one of I tied them to solar. People put the solar in for us, put those stations in. And those stations are electricity comes from the solar. So we're not paying for that.
Okay.
So they did it as part of the project. Anywhere I transfer solar on a rooftop, I'll transfer tariff. So it would have been something to railroad. But solar is not. And again, beach as part of the solar, so they'll be.
Is this time sensitive? You had mentioned something earlier about September meeting.
Time sensitive, the state wants it done by the end of the year.
Got it. End of the year.
30-day lead time on work. We got it approved at September, or again, meeting, sometime in October, be approved, and sometime in November, we'll be ready, hopefully it'll be installed.
Thoughts? Anybody?
I just wanted to talk about that timing. We got notice of getting the grant in March, right? And then we had that they had a completion date of June 1st. Why the delay? Why are we kind of hearing about it in September?
The delay is because the Energy Task Force, because of the 100% grant, you know, they had to come and get Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, because they just spent the money. So they went out there, they got it in there, and they said, stop, you gotta go do all this approval process. They didn't have it. So that really cost 90 days, but they're.
Okay. Thoughts by anybody? I have my own, but I want to,
Well, I guess I have a question. I mean, I wish the Board of Ed was here, whether this is a plan to get them at all the schools, because now, once we start here at Ward, why isn't Ludlow having them? Why aren't the middle schools having them?
what's
Why is-
Ward and Ludlow now, but
Okay,
you're right.
okay, but why aren't
Yeah.
the other schools having them? I mean, Jennings has it, you said, and now Riverfield has it? Riverfield. Oh, Jennings Beach has it. Okay, Jennings Beach. So,
Every year, the state comes out with rules, the board is looking for more, they'll get more. Town's looking for more, I like the more, it's better.
well, I guess my question is that that going to increase our costs? Is your maintenance costs going to go up because someone's not going to do it for 1,700 if we add 5 more on, you know? Yeah, solar's a different thing. Mm-hmm.
Actually, this solar going in to a board in Ludlow. Try and get that coordinated, so they're providing the power.
When is that going in? Oh,
If I get them consensus, they'll cover it, yeah. I don't think they care. You know, what they care is, the town would be losing that savings for solar, but because it's manufactured, correct? You use the $400 of solar, they're pay for it, so.
pay me now or pay me later.
Anybody else?
I want to say I like the intent, that we're moving towards electric vehicles, we're trying to support that, decrease pollution, but I'm not seeing a real systematic approach to how we're doing that. I do think we need, as Mr. Mayor said, some sort of cost-benefit analysis of what this is going to cost us. If we go solar, that's great, but it's not definitive. I think we should look at a whole kind of strategy for how we're approaching this, not just this year, but in the future.
When we first started out, it was 1 or 2, and all of a sudden, there's an annual program to do it, so it become more, it'll be annual now, it's different than one time.
I agree as well, and I'd also like to know what the Board of Education's intent is on their properties and their buildings. Because in essence, as we talked earlier, if we approve this, we're committing them to spend their budget dollars on this. Right? Thank you. Mr. Bowman? Yeah, I understand. Anybody else? Okay. Do we have any motions to consider on this? Okay, I want to make a motion that we delay this item until our next scheduled meeting, which I believe is September 20th, right? Well, September 20th is actually the capital. I don't want to do it there. What's our, 27th is our quarterly? I make a motion that we delay voting on this item to the 27th, and that we ask before we vote on this item, the Board of Education consider it, tell us what their intent is vis-a-vis this program, and that we get a economic analysis of how much these are actually costing us. And I'm not hearing anybody at this table say that they don't support a program of energy and green energy, but rather that we don't understand where we're going here and there's an impact to the taxpayer. So my motion is that we delay it, subject to those items, to our meeting on September 27th. Do we have a second to my motion? Mr. Mottola, I'll take. Any questions, comments, concerns on my motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Mr. Bowman, thank you very much. And could you coordinate that, please? I know you're pinch hitting tonight, but you've forgotten more about a lot of this than we know, and we'd appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Flynn, could you now get to the Board of Education a question that if they could try to calculate what, if all of these are used for the length of school plus 1 hour on each end, what the cost would probably be
Sure,
on a yearly basis?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can we take that down and we'll communicate that in to the chair? I don't know that they'll know that. They'll probably have to defer to the town side to get the information, but it is the relevant question. And they should know that because it's their budget.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree. Second, we did number 2, my apologies, and number 3, to hear, consider, and act upon a request from the Chief Fiscal Officer to approve Schedules A, B, C, D, E, and F, carrying over funds for encumbrances and reappropriations as of June 30th, 2016, is supported by purchase orders or letters of request by department heads or the Chief Fiscal Officer. This is a house cleaning item that we do each year. Mr. Mayor and Ms. Bossi, could you walk us through the schedules, please, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, Ms. Bossi, the controller, is going to walk you through.
In the backup, there's so labeled Schedule A through F, very similar to last year's amounts, actually. Last year was about 220 or so, which would be equivalent to the Schedule A and B put together. The only difference being that one is a PO that's 1 year older. The bottom of Schedule A, there's also the same schedule for the WPCA, has POs, 20,000 or so that's being carried over. Normally there are goods or services that have been delayed upon receipt for some reason, but all in their budget. The only difference between Schedules A and B with C is appropriations or reappropriations that do not have a PO as backup. Again, budgeted. Timing of services rendered would necessitate carrying forward those funds, and there are emails to back up the 100 and the 148,000. Schedule E is the Board of Ed PO listing as well, and you have a listing of all of those POs in the backup.
Is the amount on that one similar to last year?
Yeah, I think last year was like 670.
Right.
So it's normally, right around there, so there's nothing really.
Really, the big outlier items are the First Selectman's one, which is the strategic plan, and the information technology, is that
Yep, and
correct?
you have some emails that back up why, or what those are for.
Including a hole in one of the positions, right? For
The Director of IT
director.
has not, yep.
Right. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on these items? Mr. Walsh?
I have a question, and not seeing the first selectman here, I guess I'll direct it to you, Mr. Mayor. On August 19th, Mr. Tetro sent you an email, basically 2 sentences, saying he just wants to hold the money over the $100,000. Why wasn't the strategic plan, why were these funds spent in the 12 months he had to spend them? Why wasn't it started? what makes him believe that we are going to be able to do it this coming year, and how is that going to be implemented?
I know a little bit of that. There were discussions with, among the select persons, and regarding a committee and forming a committee who would chair the committee, et cetera. I know it was scheduled for one Board of Selectmen meeting, and at the request of one of the selectmen, it was postponed. There has been more discussion and recently, and I think that the selectmen are all ready to charge ahead.
With the problems we're having with some of the state funds and things like that, isn't this an area that, I mean, it does definitely have to be in this year, or can it be budgeted for the next year, and some of these funds go towards trying to fill some of the holes that you have in the current budget?
Well, that would certainly be one perspective. The other perspective would be that with the problems we're having with the state, that having some professional input and analysis of what we should do, could do, increase the tax base commercially, residential improvements, that it might be the opportune time. And, you know, in fact, given where we are today versus, and what we know today versus what we knew a year ago, you know, it might have even been to our benefit even though it was not the reason, it might have even been to our benefit to have this delayed a year.
Okay.
I want to opine on that because I completely agree with the second half of that statement. I don't think this should be an area that should be cut. In fact, I'm frustrated that this hasn't been expedited because I think a strategic plan that lays out, and I've said it before, what the town services of the 21st century should be is paramount to controlling the costs. Because all we're doing is the same thing over and over again, and you get the same result when you do that. So I would like to encourage that money to be spent. And in fact, if it's not enough, we need to look at ways to free up money to get the appropriate strategic plan done to support some of the tough decisions we're going to have to make probably within the next 12 to 14 months related to what's going on at the state level in our funding.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I will deliver your message to the selectmen.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Walsh, I had said previously as we began the meeting, the first selectman sent his regrets. He called, he had a personal matter come up that he could not get out of, that he had to take care of, and that's why he's not here. So I just want to go on the record on that. Any other questions? Mr. Becker?
Just, am I missing, there's no way to tell in the backup what actual department each of these, like how they total up? Is there,
Well, on the Schedule A in front of you, it's itemized out, and those 4-digit codes on the left somewhat match up to it's called an organization in Munis.
so that was where I normally,
And they're pretty much in order. But
so buried within the vendor name, if you go to like...
right above the vendor name, there's
Okay.
that code, that 0135, for example.
Gotcha.
That would match up,
And then to the
the
account
1350,
itself.
sorry.
Okay,
Digit,
all
yeah.
right, perfect.
Are you good, Mr. Becker?
Yeah, that's it, thank you.
Sure. Ms. Leclerc, and did you have your hand up? No. Okay, Mr. Brown. Anybody? Are we all set? Can we move this for a vote? Mr. Brown, do I have a second? Mr. Walsh? The item before us is to act upon a request from the Chief Fiscal Officer to approve Schedules A, B, C, D, E, and F, carrying over funds for encumbrances and reappropriations as of June 30th, 2016, the end of the fiscal year, as supported by purchase orders and/or letters of request by department heads or the Chief Fiscal Officer. All in favor of this item? Opposed? Abstentions? The item carries. Thank you very much. All right, we'll go on to item number 4. And this is a unique year for this, and it's to hear, consider, and act upon a request from the Chief Fiscal Officer to approve transfers as of June 30th, 2016. Again, the end of the fiscal year. Mr. Brown, can you put it before us? And Mr. Walsh, second. So the item is now before us. Go right ahead, sir.
Thank you. I'll give an intro, and then if you want to go through the detail, Ms. Bossy will take you through the detail. This actually, this idea was initiated actually by the Board of Finance, by the chair, a meeting a couple of months ago, that if we had, because of the potential $4 million negative revenue variance that we had in the budget, that one way to compensate for that was to transfer expenditure savings for the fiscal year 16 forward into 17. When we first looked at that at the March quarterly review, we were looking at a potential of about $1.5 million was the quick estimate on the number. The final estimate is $1,250,000 that's being transferred. And 650 of that is the contribution to surplus, 207 is other expenditure variances, and 383 coming from the contingency account for $1,240,000. To put this in a little bit of perspective, as far as our fund balance goes, since we are utilizing the contribution of fund balance, the positive variance in revenue this year is about $2 million from taxes, both half of that from prior, half of that from current, as we alluded to in March, and another $1 million from conveyance fees and other. So we have about a $3 million positive variance, which will flow to the bottom line to improve the fund balance. I haven't actually calculated the numbers, but I think that will bring us from our current 8.53 to approximately 9.3, 9.4 range.
So we're going to be over 9%.
We're going to be over 9%.
Fund balance as a percentage of budget. And I want to explain this because this was explained to me, and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. The reason we have to do it this way is we can't take that revenue overage. We can use expense offsets, right? We can use the expenses that we haven't spent, such as the contribution to surplus, such as the contingency, such as the operational savings. We can do all that. But as for any adjustment in revenue, we can't use that towards 2017. Is it a correct statement?
We can't without taking it through all three town bodies in a formal process.
Okay.
Correct statement.
So we get to the same place by allowing that $3 million to flow through the bottom line. We improve the surplus from 8.5 to 9.3 to 9.4. So we're getting the kick that we want there from the revenue overage. Correct statement?
Correct.
And then we're using, and I guess you came up with the elegant solution. I'm the one who said, can we use some of our overage or our underage this year in spending to help offset what we're doing? And you took it a step further and said the best way to do that, to keep the records clear, is to transfer it to debt service.
Correct.
As opposed to the other expense accounts. So what the 1.24 that you're transferring now in these three things, all move it into debt service so that that helps us for fiscal year.
Right, so that will be used as part of to reduce the budgeted debt service amount by that equal amount.
Does that make sense to everybody?
And then the second part of the transfers relates to the transfer of the contingency account, the contracted contingency account, to the various departments, to accrued liability, to accrued payroll liability.
And that's the 800.
Yes.
Okay. Question: in the contingency account, after doing those transfers, and after taking some of the money and transferring it to debt service, are we covered for any outstanding contracts or anything else that we know?
Right. This is the 16 contingency account, the unused 16 contingency, the unused normal contingency, and the transfer of the non-contract, what's the word I'm looking for?
Unsettled.
Unsettled contracts, thank you.
Okay.
In transferring that into accrued liabilities.
Okay. Mrs. LeClaire, did you have a question? I saw your hand.
I think I'm good for now.
Okay. Mr. Walsh.
In the document titled Funds Transfers for Fiscal Year 16 Activity General Fund, this is different now because we're going to be doing, if we decide to do this, because we have two debt service, correct? And seems to be 4 entries. What is the total amount we will be adding to debt service to pay
the amount that we'll be transferring to the debt service is $1,240,000.
1,240,000? That's what those four numbers add up to?
I-
And there's four different entries where it says to debt service, to debt service, to debt service.
I see three.
The top one that you're referring to, the $15,000, is a budgetary transfer that we would do every year. So the debt service org was over by 15 due to the refunding. So we had some fees related to the refunding that we did in March, April.
Okay,
So that actually brings that back whole.
okay.
And then
15.
the other three are the ones that Bob alluded to that add up to the 1.2.
Okay,
And those are the three at the very bottom, just to be clear. They're the 600, 650, 383, and the 207. Is that correct?
okay, that's what I wanted to be clear. So it's those three.
650 and 207 is what it should be.
Yeah.
Okay. And we just had a bond sale, correct?
Correct.
Recently? Was there any bond premium with that? I know some years we have bond premiums.
1,500,000.
1,500,000. That's a pretty good bond premium. Is it?
It's relative, I mean, but it was a bond premium. I mean, I don't quote, I mean, I don't identify it as good or bad, but
That
it's
seems like
bond
a lot of
premium.
money.
So it's, we don't strive for bond premium.
Mm-hmm.
We strive for and realize the lowest interest rate that we can realize. Because the sellers of the bonds, the underwriters, like to increase the coupon, they pay us extra cash, so the coupon is increased because they find it easier to sell a 2% coupon than a 1.5% coupon.
And we'd gone through this before, I think, and that goes into a certain fund that we have, some type of account we have?
Goes into our bond premium fund, and the bond premium from bands is utilized each year to pay down the band, and the bond premium from bonds has to be utilized over a 3-year period.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It has to be, so we're going to get the benefit of $500,000 a year for the next 3 years to go towards further debt service reduction?
Yeah, that would be utilized over 18, 19, and 20, yes.
Okay, so I guess that's where I was getting. So none will be used towards 17?
Not as of now, no.
What
That's
is
not
it?
in the plan, no.
Okay. Are you legally allowed to use it in 17 if you so chose to do that? Say we had a problem with this year, which we kind of do. Are you legally allowed to use it, and you're just making the strategic decision not to use it for 17?
I am making the strategic reason not to at this point, and I think we would be legally allowed to use a third of it, but I would think yes,
You could?
yes.
Okay, but you're saying that at this point, you're not going to do that?
No, that's not in the plans at this point.
Okay. If those plans change, can you report back to us?
Oh, most definitely.
Okay. Okay. I mean, it's a nice amount of money to be going towards debt service for $500,000 a year.
Yeah, we're looking to see, as you may or may not remember, because I know there's so many numbers, that the original shortfall in revenue was $4,114,000.
Yes.
We anticipate making up $200,000 of that through fees that were not fully included in the budgetary process for Parks and Rec of about $200,000, which brings that number down to 3.9. That 3.9 includes about $2 million. If you remember, $420,000 for the motor vehicle state watch, and $1.4 million that is a swag by me, based upon that $20 million that the legislature reduced the governor's budget by, that came out of municipal aid, and how much of that may or may not come to the town. There's been no indication if that's going to really come out of municipal aid or not. But if it does, you did a lot of ratio analysis from a lot of past activity and came up with $1.4 million. So the 3.9 actually could only be 2. I don't really know. or I guess possibly it could be worse, but that's where I'm working from strategically.
Can we, Mr. Walsh, you done?
The only thing I have a question about is, based on these numbers, and they still seem to be in flux from the state, even though we're 2 months into a fiscal year, when do they finalize what they're going to be giving us?
Well, in September, they make payments to us.
Okay.
That's the first set of payments.
Good luck with
So
that.
we're, you know, holding our breath a little bit.
All right, so the $500,000, God forbid things change for the negative, would be a cushion that you could potentially use to further
Yes, sir.
make the ends meet.
And also to address Mr. Flynn's mentioned, I think it was Mr. Flynn mentioned next year's, or no, that was during the audit committee meeting, Mr. Brown mentioned, you know, we have problems next year,
Right.
Yeah.
the cliff.
Okay.
Quick question. So, you're estimating a $4 million hole. I want to go back to that very quick. We got 1.24 here, right?
Yes, sir.
Where do we come out on the medical IBNR for Board of Education? Our good guy there.
If you remember, I estimated initially $1,052,000. In my original strategic plan, just to be careful, I put in 852. I got information today, but I have to confirm what I'm reading correctly. But it looks like the excess, based upon the latest information from the actuary, it would be my 152 or 1,252. There's a $200,000 number
So
in there
let's say
that I'm not
$1,000,000.
sure if it's been expended or not.
So let's say 1,000,001, fair?
Yes.
All right. So we're at 2,350,000, right?
Mhm.
All right. Then, we had said we were conservative on the revenue side this year, right?
Correct.
And we had allocated some money. We said there's some upside in that on both collections rate.
Well, no, it's. I'm not sure we weren't intentionally conservative. It was apparently fees that the Parks Commission implemented late in the year.
How
which
much?
were not- It's about 200,000 is the current
Right.
estimate of that.
And we also had, we also felt we were light in a couple areas of revenue relative to collection rate had come in better than we thought. We thought we had a couple $100,000 there.
The collection rate that was approved by the Board of Finance is 98.63.
Right.
At one point, I was looking for this year to come in at, when I say this year, I mean fiscal year
Yeah.
16, to come in at 98.73. We actually, I think, have come in at 98.68.
Okay, so we got a little bit there?
So that will, if we're at 9.68, we would get 125.
So we get 125. Okay. Then we were looking at, now you had said something, or I read something in the press that said that the motor vehicles was a net bad guy. But actually, when we went through the budget originally, what you had indicated the night I was in this room was that, hey, I budgeted as though we lost everything. That I know is wrong, right? I budgeted as though in the
Well,
budget.
I know that we've had this discussion a little bit,
Yeah.
and if I said that, that was certainly not what I meant to say.
Okay.
We had 2,093 vehicles. The total tax valuation on those was $1,250,000. I took a third of that.
Okay, because you had said that you thought we actually had, that night, you had said you thought you actually had some upside on vehicles that were actually assigned to other towns.
Right,
That weren't
right.
taken into
That's the other two-thirds I was thinking was coming back. And I actually looked today at the, our July through August, if you will.
Yep.
July, August collections. And we have had a negative adjustment to motor vehicle from the assessor, known adjustments of $346,000.
But you had factored in that you were going to have some of that.
Right, that's prime factor. And then what I did was, if we collect the same amount of money between September 1, 16 and June 30, 17, as we collected this in fiscal year, those months, fiscal year 16, we will come up $312,000 short versus my 416.
Okay,
Just one way of looking at it.
okay. All right. What else we got?
All right, what else we have is, we're going to save, on assessment appeals, there's going to be $75,000 savings from the legal, for legal costs,
Yep.
and $40,000 for expert witness costs,
Okay.
because of the fewer appeals that were received from the reval than was initially anticipated. We budgeted 100, and I think it's 50 or something, I forget, actually. Because of the hire in the HR department, and the person we hired has been an HR person for years, he's also an MBA, he's also an attorney, we will save at least, about $50,000 on our legal. So if you add those three up, that's $165,000.
Yep.
The big one, we budgeted senior tax relief as a carryover from the same number that we had in fiscal year 16.
Yep.
And with those final numbers in, we have $470,000 favorable variance there.
Yep.
And then the remainder comes out of operations, which is $70,000 from fire, $100,000 from library, and $600,000 from various capital accounts, and I don't know if that's like a truck or two paving, some variation of.
So what you're saying is, before we touch operations, we have about 3.3 million of a potential $4 million
Right.
hit covered. And we don't know whether that 400,000 is right, because that 400,000 is based on, or, sorry, not 400, 4 million, is based on some assumptions as to what's going to happen with municipal aid based on the state,
Right.
which we don't know yet.
Correct.
Right. So, and to Mr. Walsh's point, you also have $500,000 sitting there from this bond premium
Correct.
that, should you not want to touch the operations, you use the 500,000 to cover and get us from 3.3 to 3.8,
Correct.
and then you've got $200,000 to cover
Correct.
out of operations. And
Exactly.
there's always ups and downs, and by the way, for the
Right.
last number of years, many more ups than downs in terms of our positive variance at the end of the year.
Right.
correct?
As tight as we try to get, we're never right on the button.
Right, absolutely. Mr. Becker?
On the ops, I mean, I guess one thing is, can we get, like, maybe an email listing out of these estimates or something? Because you mentioned, so there were only two, and then you sort of said it's a big kind of miscellaneous list.
No, I said specifically library 100, specifically fire 70,
Okay.
and then 600 from capital, which would be a combination of trucks and asphalt paving, I believe.
So that's the 600, when you say trucks and asphalt paving, that's
That would
all
be maybe
DPW
200 from
related,
paving and 2 trucks.
but all within
example.
DPW per
Yeah.
se. And then the 100 for the
I understand.
library, what are they not doing that they,
I don't know, I can certainly bring that to the quarterly review.
and then the same question goes for fire, and if you want to bring it to quarterly, that's fine too, but.
And by the
that'd be helpful.
quarterly review, Mr. Becker, we should have the numbers from the state, right?
Well, we will have some indication, I have no idea what it will be, but we may have some indication based upon what, because that payment comes in around the 15th of September?
And we'll know if some of these adjustments are made and it's at the lower end of that spectrum, is the intention of the administration to keep these operational cuts? Or to say the number is significantly lower, more in check, all the work we've done, we're gonna leave the budget intact? I mean, are these gone permanently is my question.
I think, well, if that potential ECS pilot revenue estimate, I'd call it a swag rather than a wag anyway, is 1.4. If that goes away, then we certainly wouldn't, I mean, I don't think,
Have that
there'd be no need to, but to utilize that $770,000.
Already covered.
Thank you.
When will you know whether you're going to be using DPW trucks to cover the cost of this?
The end of the year.
The end of the year? Okay.
I can't speak for Mike, but that would be what I would do. I mean, I'd wait to see how the year goes. If things are looking good, we got the money, buy them.
Well, we also have a $500,000
Right.
money just sitting, $1.5 million just sitting in an account where we can legally use $500,000. And we're in the first year of a capital plan where I thought all the bodies agreed that we were going to try to stick to this plan of purchasing trucks. And it just seems like every time we turn or vote, someone's willing to just throw that plan in the garbage can. So, you know, if we have the 500,000, let's use it. And stick with the capital plan of what we were planning on
as
doing.
discussed earlier, Mr. Walsh, this $4 million, as Mr. Brown pointed out during our audit committee meeting earlier, this $4 million needs to be made up again next year.
Oh, yeah.
So so certainly when this body and the Board of Selectmen, their vote, voted on these plans, these measures, there's, you know, the $4 million shortfall, even though there was certainly an intent, as you certainly stated, a strong intent to commit to a certain acquisition schedule. When that intent was framed, there was not a $4 million potential shortfall this year and next year, and I don't know, what I'm hearing about the budget next year, another $2 billion problems in this. I've heard $1 billion, $2 billion, mostly $2 billion is the number I'm hearing. So, you know, we need
What's
to
an
be,
extra billion amongst friends?
so, you know, it's, we're just trying to adjust, at least that's what I'm trying to do, is just trying to adjust to what we have and, you know, maybe spread the pain a little bit and see where we end up.
Okay. So, yes, Mr. Becker?
Just on that, I know where you're going, and I know heading towards that future. I think to some extent, though, if we can make sure that the departments get like the trucks, things like that they need, and now knowing that they're really more than 12 months, probably when we first started these conversations, it's a good 14, 15-month arc to their next budget, where they're going to really have significant reductions overall, or pretty much being held kind of flat to where they are plus salary. We're giving them over a year to prepare for those types of things. So I personally like to see the concept of, if we can do it, as much of this budget hold, and but all the department heads know that come next year, you've had well over a year to prepare for the fact that this is a new life, and there's going to be, you know, there's going to probably be reductions to even keep you in place, and there's probably going to be more if the state budget's even worse, but you've had time to prepare. I mean, the town, you talk about strategic plan, things like that. We've had some time to prepare everybody for that.
We've been talking about this internally since March, maybe in February. So people are prepared.
Yeah, they should be.
Okay.
Thank you.
So at the end of the day, we've funded the salaries of the new contracts. Contingency is kept at an appropriate level on the balance sheet. We've adjusted the debt service to help with the hole we have in 2017 based on the state funding. Are those all correct statements?
Yes, sir.
Okay, do we have any other questions, comments, concerns on these transfers? Seeing none, I'm going to call it for a vote. And let me get the appropriate language. To hear, consider, and act upon a request for the Chief Fiscal Officer to approve the transfers we just discussed as of June 30th, 2016. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That item carries. Thank you. And please, I look forward to that discussion on our quarterly review to find out exactly where we are. And I think this will be an ongoing discussion that we need to have and certainly need clarity as we go into the budget process for next year.
Yes,
Thank you.
which is already underway.
There we go, I imagine so. All right, we have several committees that we're working or forming over the summer, and I'd like to get an update on where they are. First of all, I'm going to go to Mrs. Leclerc, who serves as the chairperson of our audit committee. I believe our audit committee is now Mrs. Leclerc, Mr. Brown, Mr. Matola, is that correct? Okay, go right ahead, Mrs. Leclerc.
Okay, the audit committee met tonight at 6 o'clock, so everything is very recent. The audit is progressing well ahead of schedule, so they moved their dates forward. They said Caitlin Bassi is, has everything very organized. So they're hoping to get us a draft on December 1, and so our next meeting will be tentatively December 6th. They haven't come up with any issues. They've tested transactions and have done quite a bit of field work. One thing they gave me is their fraud letter to sign, so if anyone has any concerns, please see me after the meeting. Otherwise, I intend to sign that because I know of no issues. And one change they talked about that I thought the board might be interested in is that the way they do the single audit, the federal government has changed the requirements to make it less of a burden for the town. And so they don't have to look at, they used to have to look at 500,000, now it's raised to 750,000, and then the same for programs. It used to be 300,000, now it's raised to 750,000. So what the federal government did was they're still looking at the same number in dollars being checked, but the burden is less because it's bigger transactions and not so many small transactions. So I thought that was interesting to know, and they look at 20% of the activity. There's also some new disclosures that will be coming our way for the financial statements that are going to be more towards public companies, and that will be for the investments, so for the pension and the town investments. They will have more disclosure by type of risk and category. And I don't know, Jim, John, did I leave anything out?
Anybody have any?
The one thing we think we got, they're gonna have to meet with the pension board because
Because of the disclosure.
disclosure.
Right.
Or somehow meet with them, I don't. but-
And you guys are facilitating that? Mr. Mayor, are you facilitating the auditors meeting with the pension board? Okay.
I don't know that that was so well planned out yet, but.
It didn't sound so unequivocal.
This is part of the normal course of business.
Okay. Anything else? Thank you very much. Is that the conclusion of that report?
That is.
Okay, thank you. And we'll go to Mr. Brown for Budget Committee. Mr. Brown.
Okay, thank you.
And your Budget Committee includes yourself, Mr. DeWitt, I believe Mrs. Marmion. Are you going to go on that going forward?
I believe I'm on it. I have not met or
Okay.
given any.
Because I think it
input.
was the transition.
It's ongoing, correct?
Yeah.
Correct. So that is correct. Those are the members. So what this is a postmortem of the 2016-17 budget process. So yes, we met in person over the summer, various phone calls, email exchanges. I did meet with Mike Tetro to receive his input on the budget process as it pertains to 2016 and 17. If we just go down the list here, what was good, I think over the years, the committee, working with the Board of Finance, has streamlined and improved the process in many ways, and we continue to do so that every year builds improvement upon the previous year. So with that, will go to future actions and recommendations. And these recommendations really came from members of this board throughout last year's budget process. So we can discuss them now, and we could accept them or not accept them, or talk about them at a later time. First of all, the fund balance itself, which has gotten a lot of attention, necessarily so, over the past few years. One of the recommendations was that the Board of Finance should review the fund balance before setting the mill rate and ask the administration if anything has changed since the beginning of the budget process. Since we do review the fund balance at the beginning of the process.
Do you have another copy of your document? I thought they were passed out. No. Thank you. Sorry, my apologies in interrupting.
Not a problem. And again, just ask before we set the mill rate if anything has changed in regards to that fund. Okay?
Sure. Any comments on that? I think that's a good suggestion. We keep that in mind. Go ahead, Mr. Brown.
To break out specific personnel in the regular budget that fall under seasonal payroll.
So we had some questions about this during the budget process over the categorization of personnel, and it led to some confusion. Maybe we-
Rec,
Park and Recreation, the golf
registrar of
courses,
voters, right.
Registrar of Voters.
You're frowning.
Sorry, so what are we asking for?
To break seasonal payroll out versus full-time regular payroll.
Well, it's broken out. You mean a listing of the type of seasonal employees? Is that what you mean? Do
Yeah.
you want to come up with categories they should use, or should they make them up? Like rec, camp counselors, I mean, but obviously Registrar of Voters is going to be a completely different,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, come up with some categories and just present them back to us.
We'll take a look at it.
I'm not sure, I mean,
There was confusion, particularly I think as it was the Registrar of Voters, over how the seasonal payroll was broken out. I remember it. It wasn't my confusion. I'm speaking on behalf of the board here, right? But there was confusion over what those buckets were, and whether they were part-time versus seasonal, I think, was also a confusion. So we don't need to resolve it here, but I think what we need to do is make sure we've got a common understanding of what those payroll accounts stand for.
Well, I think there was confusion too, because the two registrars were taking money that was in seasonal payroll.
That might have been, I don't
And
remember.
they're full-time registers who were getting salaries. I mean, that was a big confusion I think some of us were surprised
Yeah,
about.
I
Because
certainly-
all of a sudden, they were putting in some, I guess, overtime and burying it into seasonal payroll somehow, and kind of keeping that hidden from
they
everybody.
had a
I don't like
stipend
the
or
word buried,
something.
but okay.
Well, it was,
Yeah,
it
no,
was
I-
kind of
yeah.
surprise
Right.
to all of us that that's where it was,
Yeah,
when we.
No,
had to
I
break it down.
definitely remember the problems with the registrars, which we're trying to resolve internally right now. But,
it was seasonal
thinking-
versus
right,
part-time,
yeah, with the registrars, but like.
and we also, I think, had it in
I'm just
Park and
thinking
Rec.
of like, I mean, the Parks and Rec, and I think, I don't know how many hundreds of people they hire in the summertime.
Let's take it
No.
offline,
Yeah.
okay, and come up with something that works for both sides. But there was a significant amount of confusion. I think Mr. Walsh is right on the confusion that was at the registrar.
Remember that one well.
Right, and we also sometimes have issues at the golf courses and things like that, part-time versus seasonal versus all that. Remember?
Okay, we'll come up with something.
All right,
Excellent. Next one, convene a meeting or committee to discuss moving heart and hypertension into the internal service fund. I guess you should say back into the internal service fund. Just a meeting to discuss it. We did talk about it with the auditors tonight, and they thought it was a meeting worth having as well.
is it a meeting, or do we need to see what other towns are doing now? What this is something that goes back and forth, right? I'm looking at our accounting team. So what is now the trend?
Well, if you ask me what I think is the right thing to do,
That's not what I asked, but go ahead.
it should be part of the internal service fund.
Is that what's going on in other towns right now?
Well, I mean,
Well, during our audit meeting, Joe did say that probably more than not have it in their internal service fund. But there's no, he wasn't strongly
No, because he
saying
allowed
one
the
side.
transfer a few years ago, right?
Yes.
Was it him?
What was the reasoning for the transfer, taking it out?
There,
Why did he recommend taking it out?
because you don't need to book the accrual in,
Right.
it is still a government-wide entry,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't need to book it into the internal service fund, so that long tail on those claims,
It didn't look as bad.
you don't need to book those.
So then why do we want to put it back in and do the same thing and have the tail?
Well,
Visibility to
it smooths out your expenses year to year was one of the things that Joe said, I'm just paraphrasing, because basically you would budget what you think, and then all the variability, just like workers' comp, kind of falls into the internal service fund as opposed to remaining in the general ledger. But there's pros and cons to probably both.
Okay.
It allows for better transparency, doesn't it? And I want to go to Mrs. LeClaire.
What he said is that you'd be able to budget like the same amount every year or consistently.
Smooth it out.
And smooth it out, and, eventually you'd make headway against the accrual. So it would look bad at first, and then it would be a planning tool, so you can, budget better.
Yeah.
Maybe
Can we,
should have a meeting on that?
Yeah, what I'm going to propose, I think is the right way to come, is can you, first step, I think, has to be Mr. Mayor and Mrs. Bossi sitting down with Mr. Senafani, do the pros and cons of the approach of moving it into the internal service fund, if you wouldn't mind. And then the second thing, I think, it would probably be beneficial to have the audit committee take this topic up and come back, since it is, you know, a disclosure requirement, and see what your recommendation might be. And I think we have to have this solved before the budget process, because you need to budget accordingly, right? Is that correct?
Yep.
So would that be onerous to do it that way, or do you think that's the right way to approach it?
Yeah, and I think the only, which would come out of it, you just didn't mention it, but you're certainly thinking about it in the back of your head, you know, the big indicator is going to be what would be the reserve hit.
Right.
So what, you know, like X number of years ago, we had a deficit in that reserve of $7 million, and we, oh my God, please don't even talk about it. But today it's $2 million or something. And I don't know what the reserve hit would be. I was looking at that today, actually, and I have a couple of questions. But yes, we'll calculate all those numbers and go through that process.
But to the transparency side, right, it's what's the reserve hit, but quite frankly, that's the point. Because right now it's buried and it's not
Right.
transparent.
But I mean, you have
and
to-
you're not talking about it.
Right.
Not you.
Yeah.
I mean, in
No,
general.
I totally agree. But I'm saying,
Yeah.
but you have to take, you know, once you make the decision to do that, it's kind of like, okay, your internal service fund reserve now changes by some number.
Right, and what's that
And
number?
I might have some of that built into workers' comp. I'm not positive, but it's something we're, yes.
Mrs. Claire, did you have something on that?
The other thing that Joe mentioned was that right now, when the Board of Ed comes out of it, the internal service fund will be much smaller, and there's not that much in it. There's only workers' comp, the town liability, and
Active medical. Mhm.
left in it.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot.
Was he saying that's a good thing to put in there then? Or was he using that as a reason for or against?
Stand out more,
It might, so it might be worse.
possibly.
Yeah, understand that. Okay.
Worth the meeting?
Yeah, I think to give it to them and then have them go to the audit committee and then have the audit committee bring it back to us so that we can decide how to do it on the budget process. I think it's absolutely worth it.
Yeah,
Does
there's an
anybody
audit
disagree?
committee meeting scheduled December
6th.
6th,
He
so
goes
we'll
back to
do it by then.
Yeah,
Okay.
cool. Thank you. Go ahead,
Last
Mr. Brown.
one, limit, again, it's limit, not eliminate. Limit discussions on procedural issues versus the focus, which should be on budgetary issues. The budget is the guide for all budget discussion topics. Topics not in the budget book should be discussed in regular monthly meetings or if found to be applicable to the budget during a special session meeting. This would include the discussion of new initiatives. So what we're saying here is during the budget season, there's a lot of discussion, great ideas, a lot of questions on why we do certain things. Most likely, most of them are not going to affect the budget for that coming year. So, instead of discussing something for 30 minutes that's not going to change anything for this year, let's acknowledge it's a good idea, write it down, come back to it when there's time to discuss it and actually make the change.
And didn't this happen during the fire department budget?
Right.
Was the one we were talking about. Okay, I think that's fair. Does anybody have any comments on that? Mrs. Marmon?
I actually don't have a comment on that, so I'll wait. I wanted to go back
Okay.
to the, number one, the postmortem.
Sure. Does anybody else have any comments on this specific one? Mrs. Leclerc?
The only question I have is that if we do that, usually during budget season, we don't have that many of our monthly meetings.
Yep.
So we'd have to wait a very long time possibly to discuss some of these. So when we plan our calendar, we may want to throw a monthly meeting in or some type of meeting in so we could discuss anything that comes up.
And I think this also comes from, I think you're right, I think this also comes from the fact that kind of new initiatives get discussed or unveiled during the budget process. So they don't have a vetting beforehand. So all of a sudden somebody says, hey, this year I'm asking for $200,000 because I want to do this, which leads to a discussion of, well, if you're doing that, why aren't you doing this? Or could we do it this way or could we do it that way? Which are really not budgetary discussions. Those discussions should take place beforehand, and then when you go to the budget, you should say, hey, remember when we talked about this? This is the funding for that initiative that we talked about a couple of months ago.
Exactly.
And that's what that gets frustrating, and quite frankly, it's hard to control as the chair, because you don't want to, because you have a $200,000 thing in here, and it needs to be vetted.
Right.
You know, Mrs. Leclerc, you're still going.
So in addition to a capital planning meeting, do we want a budget planning meeting that department heads could bring their new ideas?
New initiatives.
Well, Mr. Tetra and I talked about that, and they should be bringing the new initiatives to it right now, this fall or during the summer, as you guys get prepared to talk about next year. And if it should come before us, before then, or if you bring it to us during the budget season, I mean, you just lay it out, and you have backup for it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to put my administrative hat on and say administration is management and Board of Finance is finance. So, I mean,
It's not about scope creep, though, and it's not about control. It's about you coming before us and saying, not you, but right, the town coming
Yeah.
before us and saying, we want $500,000, and this is the new initiative, we want $500,000. So then the budget conversation gets waylaid by a discussion about the new initiative. And you get into the weeds about, well, did you look at it this way? Did you look at it that way? And at the end of the day, we have to finance it, so it's right for us to ask those questions.
right, and I understand it. And I don't disagree with that
Yeah.
at all. And in fact, I strongly do agree with that. Either way, you're going to have the discussions. So you're moving the discussion, like Mary just said, well, we're going to have another meeting? Or you're going to have, bring it to each meeting? I mean, if you're going to discuss it, you're going to discuss it.
Now, I think the example that Mr. Flynn gave when we were discussing the fire department's budget is a good example. Okay, it's something that came up.
I don't remember the issue.
We were talking about how we provide ambulance service to the town,
Right.
and it's not a bad discussion. My point is, we weren't going to change it at that moment.
Right.
It's something that should be discussed.
Well, that's something that's like 5 years into the future. I mean, I don't even know why you brought it
Fine,
up.
well, my point is, we spent 35, 40 minutes talking about it, it seems.
Yeah, but wasn't it, I mean, I'm trying not to be
But that's what
contradictory here,
we're
but
trying to-
that wasn't even in the budget.
Right.
It was like,
It was a question over the
And I'm
cost
not
of it
saying it
and the
wasn't,
contract.
it's a valid point, it's just that we weren't going to change it during that.
I think that came up because one of the selectmen asked the question, could we make a lot of money if we did ambulance services?
And it's a good question. It's just,
Yeah, but that wasn't
what
that
happened
wasn't an initiative, and then the chief said, yeah, that's something I'm thinking about, but it's
Yeah,
5
but they
years
got
from
into-
now.
It wasn't I just thinking about it. It was,
Went on and on.
it went on and on.
that's
Yeah.
my,
All right, yeah.
That's probably my fault more than
Yeah,
anybody's,
this is-
but that's fair.
Yeah.
Mrs. Leclerc, are you,
Yeah,
anything else? Mr. Becker, you had your hand up.
but it's not a bad idea to.
Generally covering the concepts. I mean, at one point, I think the nonprofits kind of got notices, hey, if you want to do presentations, come book them in sort of the mix leading up to budget. I mean, it's not a bad idea to just suggest make sure the department heads know that if they have something that they want to share with us,
Yeah.
do it in advance, they can have a better conversation about it.
I agree with
That's
that.
the worst thing.
Yeah,
Just be open.
Yeah, I'm gonna retract what I said earlier. I mean,
It's common practice.
Yeah, just let people know. If there's something coming up, let's share the information.
When we start talking about in January, saying you're going to see these 5 new initiatives that
Yeah.
are coming in the
Yeah.
budget in March, period.
Yeah, and if there needs to be a meeting, have a meeting.
And if I was in my-
Not have a separate, I wouldn't support a separate meeting, but
Yeah.
part of one of the
But
Board of Finance.
Put it on the calendar, even November
Yeah.
or something now. I mean, if I was them, I'd rather have everyone's awake and, we're gonna actually have a real dialogue and, that sort of thing, than, hey, you're the last presenter of the
Everyone's awake
night.
is a real
Let's
stretch,
talk for an
but
hour.
that's
Well, yeah.
We
You
just
know?
canceled
Or maybe they want us to. I
two
don't know.
meetings because we had nothing to talk about,
Right.
all right? And then we're gonna sit here till 1 o'clock in the morning talking about something in March that we're not gonna be able to do anything about at that point.
That's fair. It's fair. Any other comments on this specific topic?
Just that, I guess some of these new initiative things, some of them have come from the departments themselves.
Yep.
Especially school security and the funding of the police department.
Yep.
It seems like 2 years in a row, there was lengthy discussion because it was how are we gonna fund this? What officers are we moving around? And if those are brought up the night of the budget, they're just gonna have to be talked about the night of the budget.
Agree with that. But in fairness to them, they also gave us fair warning several times that that was coming, right?
Mhm.
So it was, hey, this is coming. We tend to get waylaid by topics where people come up with their own ideas that aren't going to be resolved at that issue, that table. It's very fair. Very fair. Any other? Mrs. Marmion, you've been waiting patiently?
Thanks. I just, from the postmortem standpoint,
Yeah.
what was good, it's referenced that there have been many improvements over the past 8 years. I think it would be helpful I'm not asking to write a book on this, but just to cite what some of those improvements are for perspective, for people coming from the outside looking in. The other thing was, I think that there probably needs to be, if this is truly a postmortem of this budget process for the past year, a bit more in terms of analysis. This was a different budget year in that you were asked to vote on a mill rate without knowing what the state was going to do in terms of the amount of money that they were not going to be given to us. And I think that should be referenced because really, as Mr. Mayor pointed out, we don't know what's going to happen next year. We may just want to put that in there as the scenario was different this year. And I just think it's worth noting to give people, again, some nature that this was a
So
unique
that I
year.
want to talk about, and we could talk about that as a committee.
Sure, and I'm just saying it was a unique, if there's truly going to be a postmortem, there's a situation analysis, and then what do we do with that? That's where I'm coming from.
I mean, your point is very valid, and I think that should be discussed and addressed by the committee. But the reality is, we always vote on the mill rate without knowing what we're getting from the state.
I guess we did have a better sense this year that,
We had a lot of rumor and innuendo, but we didn't know for sure what they were going to do. We still don't.
right,
as
and
we sit
I'm
here
not
tonight.
here to debate what the right decision was in terms of,
Understand.
it's more that it was a unique year, and I think it should be pointed out that there may be more of this coming. Given that,
Absolutely.
as part of the postmortem, it just needs to be stated as fact. This is what happened. That's all I'm saying. It's unique in terms of what happened, and the board was put in a unique position, I think, even if you have to vote every year, not knowing for sure. So it's just more of a situation analysis.
So maybe exceptional situation analysis, because there's a lot of situations that come up. So
Yeah.
it's worth talking about.
Okay.
When we get together again, thanks.
Thanks.
Sure. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Go ahead. Mr.
Following
Walsh.
up on Ms. Marmee, just a couple of thoughts. Number one, I think that we need to get our state reps and the state senator in here, and there's got to be a correction to the state budget process where the state aid is determined earlier in the year, separate from the rest of the budget. It's just unfair for the communities throughout Connecticut to have to be voting on the budgets like we do kind of blindly, not knowing what we're getting. And I know that there was some initiative to do that.
I think it was CCM.
Yep.
Yeah.
CCM wants to do the same thing, but to get some update on where they stand on that.
I agree with that.
So that would be good. My second comment in regards to, I guess, the post-mortem is just a general frustration in the process, I guess, that I have had, and having been in the unique situation of being on all three boards that vote on the budget. To me, it seems like we have an inefficient process, and the fact that I guess the most efficient process would be for all bodies to hear the exact same information when we're hearing it, as opposed to there being this bifurcated, we hear with the Board of Selectmen, and then the department heads have to go out again to the RTM for another month, and maybe so the RTM members watched us. I mean, they're not coming to the meetings, because I presume that they're watching, our great knowledge on Fair TV, but I know that's probably wrong. But it just seems as though if we had a process where, even if we went to an auditorium to have these meetings, and whether the Board of Selectmen asked questions first, then us, then the RTM, everybody would seem to hear the same information at the same time, and would get to hear the value of all of our collective questions, and then be able to vote, almost like every other night. 1, 2, 3. The system that we have seems to just take a long time, 2 months. It just seems to be quite inefficient, and I don't know how to fix it, because I understand that there are charter requirements that would probably involve charter review, but it's just maybe something to start looking into.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh.
Okay.
Appreciate that very much. Any other comments? All right, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you to the committee for their work, and we look forward to further updates as we move forward. 2 other committees. There was the building committee that was put together, and I believe that's Mr. DeWitt, Mrs. LeClaire, and is it Mr. Hopkins or Mr. Mottola that's on that committee? I think it's Mr. Hopkins who volunteered for that one. I know Mr. DeWitt's not here tonight. He's the chair of that committee. He will get back to us with a report in the next meeting. I know we had some questions. So it is Mr. Mottola. Yeah, trust me. We'll get a report on the next meeting. Yes. The next one, Mrs. LeClaire, Mr. DeWitt, Mr. Mottola. The next one is the surplus, and that must be the one that Mr. Hopkins is on. And Mr. Walsh, you're the chair on that, and I asked if I could serve on that committee as well.
Fund balance?
Fund balance. No.
Well, we just, 3 is enough.
I know, but I'm saying.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Walsh.
Well, we haven't met, and one of the main reasons I have not really called a meeting is because I think we need to see where the fund balance is and whether we were going to do these transfers or not, and I think it's an excellent starting point with the fact that we will be getting our quarterly review and find out exactly to the dollar where our surplus stands at that point in time. But I think it is a positive that we are at 9.3 or 9.4 approximation that Mr. Mayor gave us, which almost puts us right in the middle of our current requirement of, well, actually, our current requirement of between 8 and 11%. Although the 8% was not actually, it was actually lower because we were not at 8% at the time. So, over the last month or so, I've been kind of reading articles to see whether there's been any change in the credit agencies on what they're looking for. And there does not seem to be any for AAA communities. We do need to meet with Mr. Centofanti and Matt Spurndle from Phoenix Advisors just to get their opinion. But I will tell you that the literature that's out there has not suggested that AAAs should really, it's no different than what Mary and I saw. You can find articles that say you have to be up close to 15%. You find articles that say 10%, but one of the reasons I wanted to wait was based on this. I want to see where we stand in the exact same towns that we looked at the last time. We have been climbing up the ladder in regards to the fund balance we have. I think we've made a dramatic change. I think we're going to see some dramatic results on where we stand with the other communities. But once we have that formal number, I think it'll be a good time to meet. I don't think it's going to take a long time to meet.
So do you think October, November?
Oh, easily.
Okay.
Easily. I'd like to have one meeting with Mr. Spurndell and Mr. Centofanti present to opine on their opinions, and then see where we stand from there. I mean, one of the things we had talked about was maybe changing the policy to, once we got over the 8%, I know our body has talked about maybe allowing the internal service fund to be funded if we were having problems, and I support that. I plan on at least making a recommendation that that be the case.
Okay. So why don't we plan, so you're going to have a meeting at some point in October after we know,
Well, I want to caution you, at that point, it's not audited numbers.
when is it?
So,
Yeah, but when?
December. But I'm just saying.
But our numbers haven't really changed that much from what the number you would have drastically to what
No,
you plan
but
on
there
having.
is always.
Let's plan on
I just want to
October.
leave that out there, because we're talking in a few weeks from now, so you're saying in September.
Mhm.
If we're going to have the quarterly.
Yeah.
I'd
Right.
like to say they're going to not change, but I just want to say that they could change.
Point noted. But let's shoot for a
But I
late
think
October date.
Our range for what we're going to set the range to be, I don't think it's going to be changing all that much. And the numbers, whether audited or unaudited, unless we have some gaping hole, is not going to take us to the low end or the high end
Right.
of those figures. We're pretty close to being in the middle right now.
Right.
So it's more, I guess, looking at the policy as a whole to see where we stand with the other AAA communities, not only within Connecticut, within Fairfield County, but nationally,
Yep.
and where we are supposed to be with accredited agencies.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. We look forward to those meetings in October or so, and let's get an update in November.
Yes, and just lastly, Tom, we'd love to have you on the committee. I think we put it out several times, asking to see whether one of the Democrats wanted to be on the committee, and we got nothing. Correct?
Well, no, actually, my understanding, and based upon my notes, Hopkins and Sheila had both volunteered for the Budget Process Committee.
Right.
And noting that, I called Ms. Marmion today and asked her if she would transfer to the Fund Balance Committee, because we did not have a Democrat, and you said yes.
Okay. So we didn't have a Democrat on the
Didn't,
fund balance, but
yeah.
now we do. It'll be Mrs. Marmion. There we go. Great. Mr. Hopkins will go on the Budget Committee. Excellent. Good.
We have a full committee now to meet.
Thank you very much. All right, the last item is to hear, consider, and act upon any communications. I have just two items here. Just as an FYI, I'm sure everybody knows, but the Board of Education was meeting tonight, at which point they were going to announce who they were appointing as the new superintendent of schools. I know of no other information other than that, and that candidate will be in town at some point later this week, meeting with people in the education community and maybe some other elected officials. I do not know a start date, I do not know compensation, I do not know who the individual is. We congratulate our colleagues on the Board of Education for fulfilling one of their most important statutory requirements in getting that done. Mr. Mayor, do you have any additional information?
Dr. Tony Jones, that's Tony with an I, from Church Falls, Virginia, was unanimously elected to be the new superintendent.
Falls Church.
Falls Church, Church Falls.
That's Church Falls.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, well, as that woman, correct? Well, we look forward to meeting her at the appropriate time. The last item that I wonder if it caught anybody else's attention, because it certainly caught mine. I'm going to look at Mr. Walsh on this. Fairfield Citizen published an article on the first day of school, and that article discussed how there's 65 new teachers, and there's 65 positions that rolled over. In the course of our budget discussions, we've always talked about, 18 to 20 positions. So I'm wondering how we get from 18 to 20 to 65. And the article made it seem as though that 65 was a standard number every year, when this board has been told the standard number every year is about 20. And that a couple of years ago was a big anomaly where they had almost 70 or 80, right? But that was an outlier. So being the finance guy that I am, I'm questioning what's the right number there and where's the difference?
Well, it could be our first question to the new superintendent.
Absolutely. But can we follow up on that? Because that was,
I noted that article and I wondered about it, but
that's more than a rounding error. on that one?
I wonder, I'm just curious, I wonder if they were talking about student teachers, because they hire so many
No,
student
this were
teachers.
full-time staff.
Full-time staff?
This is what they said. Yeah, now, I don't know whether that's 65 retirements, whether it's 20 retirements and 45 left left and they hired new, but you would think there's some staving and steps if that happened. Right, but there's 65, and it was, oh yeah, this is normal. This, every year this happens. And so it was noted. Right? Any other questions, communications from anybody else? If not, our next scheduled program is September 20th, and that's the capital planning meeting. And that's September 20th, and then we have September 27th. So, ladies and gentlemen, summer's over. Thank you for everything. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Brown, do I have a second? We'll take Ms. Marmion on this one. All in favor of adjournment? Opposed? None. Have a good evening.